Okay. Yeah. So let me just back up a bit. So we're looking at different ways by which we can actually teach. We looked at the different presentations and also ways by which we teach. In the sense, what should my perspective be? I can make my teaching to be learner oriented or expectation oriented, application oriented. So we're looking at application oriented, how we need to apply it and think of the audience, think of the way different kinds of people who might be there, who might be listening, and how this truth would apply in their lives. Right? What are the challenges to applying it, and how this would apply? How can they actually put to practice in their lives? So it will really be helpful if we can go into that detail, understand that, right? Put yourself in their shoes, understand what is it that they might be going through, and then apply the truth. For example, for some of the challenges faced by senior people, that I've come to realize is movement, mobility, right? For, let's say, they want to pay some bills, let's say they want to buy certain things. Now they are not able to as they used to. They're not able to go to that place. Like, even for them, for going to church is a challenge, right? Because there's well, they're finding it difficult, right? And they, to move, to walk, to even use public transport, finding it difficult. So the application of certain truths are going to be different, right, for them. So how would you apply it? Right? Or simply, if they're just talking about challenges that senior people are facing, could be facing, you could look at all these things, right? um, so just an example, right? So application oriented. Then the fourth thing is to keep it retention, and I'm on page 55, I think, in the notes. Retention oriented, in the sense, okay, I'm teaching a lot of things now. What would be the best way um, that I can communicate so that they retain what I'm sharing? Okay. We can use, there are certain tools, like you share certain illustrations, examples. It fleshes out, illustrates the point. They're able to remember the story. They're able to remember the truth that was shared. The Lord Jesus did that by means of parables, right? He gave a very earthly story with a spiritual, heavenly, content truth to it, and he did that. So every time you remember the sower, you see the fields, you're pointing, you're remembering the truth that was shared about the word of God and about the condition of the heart and so on. So sharing that, so that would help in retention. Also, this Sunday, if you were there in church this past Sunday at All People's Church, you're talking about an acronym. Okay, what is an acronym? Is a short form. Okay, so we were looking at an acronym called, while talking about the mind, we're talking about an acronym SAFE. So S referred to speaking the word. A, what was A about? Um, A is, anyone remember? Jeffina, remember? Okay, I'll ask Pastor John Paul. A, and then F, and then E. F is focus on the word. A is align oneself to the word, and E is examine or evaluate. So, um, so it's all about the word of God. So how, when one is dealing with temptations, addictions, and so on. So finally, in the application, we looked at this, right? So we looked at speaking the word, aligning oneself to the word, focusing on the word, and evaluating circumstances, situations based on the word of God. So this acronym SAFE. So things like this would really help people to retain. Okay. I still remember the message that was shared at my wedding, because it was 4 C's. Okay, about communication, contentment, communication, concern, contentment, and commitment. Right. So 4 C's. So simple things like this would really help people to retain, even after years of them hearing the message. So think of creative ways by which they can retain the truth, because what you're sharing is really something important, right? Okay, need oriented. Okay, so you're asking questions, you're looking at certain needs which people would have. So if that message is fulfilling that need, okay, or exposing people to a need that they might have, or they may not even be thinking about that thing, but then you you actually expose the people to a particular need that they might have, then that would be really good, because then now their need is being met. They are also, in a way, equipped to meet that need. Sometimes it's like that. Okay, this is how you meet that need. This is how you engage with the word. This is how you engage and maybe use the authority, etc. Use your faith and face, facing challenges. So in all these different ways, what are we actually doing? We are communicating a way in which the need can be met. Okay, so the message can be need oriented. Okay, and also, lastly, also the thing is the message to be equipping oriented. Okay, so which means that people are strengthened, equipped, um, they're trained uh, to take care of what the need is, right? Um, like someone says, yeah, it's good to give a person a fish, but if you teach the person to fish, right, now that person doesn't have to go hungry the rest of their lives, right? You don't have to be there, but then you've actually taught them something important to be able to, catch fish on their own, right? So while it's good that we are ministering and giving the answers, and it's even more important that we teach how to approach God, how to reach and learn for themselves, receive for themselves, right? And so it can be equipping oriented, which is really, really valuable. Okay. So any questions or anything that you might want to add, please feel welcome. You're welcome to do that. Um, there's some more information on in the notes, but I'm not going to go into it, because these are some things that are overlaps, um, all that we've already seen, and some different perspectives. So I'm not going to go into it. But if there are any thoughts, any doubts, anything at all, you can ask. Okay. Um, yeah, feel free to put it on the chat. I just thought today we could watch a video. We've been talking about the TED Talks, right, which are very, very precise and great way in which these talks are. I mean, these speeches are made, and TED, that organization standing for technology and education and design, and the tagline is ideas worth spreading, right? So about different topics, again, I just want to say that it's not nothing, it's secular, it's not Christian, but they have some great speakers and we can learn from it. So I just thought we'll watch, now it's yeah, we have some time. I thought we'll watch a video together, and then at the end of it we can talk about it. Okay, so even as you watch, you I just want to request you to observe. You can note down certain things that you're observing. It could be about the content, it could be about how the person is presenting, it could be about what the person is using to present, etc., right? So that is making the talk impactful. Okay, so just maybe you can just make some notes even as you let me just put that up for you. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's watch this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. When Todd first called and said that the theme was community, I started looking for the ways that community is used. And they're used a lot of different ways: online community, business community, white community, black community, tech community. I even crowdsourced this question to my little cadre of social media followers, and I got all kinds of responses where people felt community. Festivals, football games, funerals, churches. And of course, it might not surprise you that if you look at this, it doesn't really have much of a meaning. It doesn't really tell us what we should be doing if we're trying to build a community. When I think about community, I think about Martin Luther King Jr. And I think about the notion that he put forward of a beloved community. He said, our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls and a quantitative change in our lives. You see, the community that King envisioned is all-inclusive. Everybody's a part of it. It can't be exclusionary if it's beloved. Second, if it includes everyone, the differences of its members have to actually be embraced, the beloved part of the community. And then King talked a lot about, when he talked about beloved community, the fact that we all had to work for justice. And not only the justice of ourselves, but we had to work for the justice of every member of the beloved community. Now that is a pretty tall task, but I think it's a necessary one. And King thought it was a necessary one because what he said was that in an interconnected world, the only way we would develop the empathy required to actually solve our problems across our differences was by building the beloved community. So that's the challenge. How do we build the beloved community? Well, what if building the beloved community actually meant us taking one phrase and applying it to ourselves and to our actions? A phrase we've all heard many times: love thy neighbor. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Love thy neighbor? You don't know my neighbor. Or, like my wife and I, our walls were so thin, we knew our neighbor far too well. But I don't want us to think about a specific person when we think about love our neighbor. I think we want to look at the root of the word. It actually has two roots: ne, near, and bor, home base, or someone's heart to a certain extent. So if we take this notion of neighbor, instead of thinking about the people who live near us, I want us to turn it around and think about the people who we live near, that we actually start to be a neighbor by living near someone else's home. So in other words, how do you love someone's home base? Well, you can visit their home base, you can visit their community, and I'm sure many of us have. If I went to your home, I'm sure I'd see travel photos, and I'd see mementos, maybe artwork from other places, maybe other foods that you consume at home. But those visits are only visits. They are not the deep kind of engagement that we need when we think about beloved community, because if we're going to take this notion seriously, we have to confront a very tough truth. We cannot consume our way to community. One click, one more friend, one more trip is not actually going to build the beloved community. Instead, we need an engagement, an ongoing engagement with other communities and on their home turfs. There was a visit that I made when I was in college. Imagine a Sunday, sticky Sunday in September. I'm on the MARTA bus going down to Old Ebenezer Baptist Church, King's home church on Auburn Avenue. And I go into the church. It was still in the original sanctuary then, and it was a sight. The original pulpit where King preached, the robes of the choir, the long pews, the women wearing their Sunday hats that you always see in an African-American church. And I sat down, and the service started, and we opened up our hymnal to the first song of the day, and I was shocked to discover that the same song that was first that day on Ebenezer Baptist docket was a song that we used to sing in my all-white country church in rural Arkansas. The second song, same one. Third song, same one. I knew all the songs. Now, I didn't sing them as well or as fast as Ebenezer Baptist, but I knew them. And so I jumped right in and I sang them, and this caused a bit of a stir among my seatmates left and right who I did not know, both African-American folks. They were curious why this 18-year-old kid knew all of these spirituals. So we started talking about it. We started talking about church. We started talking about family. We started talking about home. I went back the next Sunday, and then I went back again. And those visits turned into an engagement, which then turned into an academic pursuit, that then turned into a professional pursuit. And for me, a lifetime of understanding and studying and engaging Southern African American history and communities. That's more than a visit. That's actually being a neighbor. It's not only that we build community by being the neighbor, but I would argue that being a neighbor is the ultimate expression of love. And the reason is because if we truly love our neighbor, that connection can transform people, and it can actually reconcile the fiercest of enemies. If you look at the history of the American Civil Rights Movement, all the leaders at some point said something along the following lines. We weren't just fighting for African American freedom, we were trying to liberate the oppressors from their mindset. And we were trying to liberate America from the plight of segregation. And no one embodied this more than someone that I've gotten to know, Reverend C.T. Vivian. Reverend C.T. Vivian is a true American hero. He was one of the people who sat in Nashville. He was drug out of restaurants, spit upon. He was one of the Freedom Riders, where he was beaten in Alabama and Mississippi. He was on the bridge in Selma on Bloody Sunday. This is a picture of C.T. praying for Sheriff Jim Clark, who was the feared and some would say murderous sheriff of Selma. I asked Reverend Vivian one day, I said, what were you thinking when you walked up every day and prayed for Sheriff Clark? And he said, I'd pray in the morning and I'd go to Sheriff Clark and he would yell at me. And the next day I'd pray and then I'd go and he'd arrest me. And one day he even broke his hand across my jaw when he punched me. And the next day I prayed again because I truly believed that the next day was the day we were going to be reconciled and that he was going to see the evil of his ways. That is stunning. And it is what we see in so many different contexts. Whether you look at Gandhi and the way he thought about the British, you look at Mandela and Tutu and the way they thought about the Afrikaners, they believed that they weren't just freeing themselves, but they were building a whole new society, and they were going to reconcile with their neighbors who they were living near. And they were right. Each of those societies were changed because of the practice of loving thy neighbor. Now, these people have risen to the world of almost being saintly. And so it begs the question, how do we actually build our own capacity to be a neighbor, to practice this notion of loving our neighbors? Well, I believe that actually it is a combination of a mindset, the notion of beloved community, the notion of loving thy neighbor, living near their home base, and a certain skill set, that there actually are a few attributes that you can develop over time. And I'd like to just take a minute to kind of run through them. First one of these, and probably most important, is a true respect for otherness. If you're going to actually venture out and visit someone's home base and be the only person who is different who's there, you have to actually truly respect the otherness. I've done a lot of cross-community work, and I've often been the only other in the room, the only white person, the only male, the only Southerner, the only whatever. And I used to, when I first started this, I used to try to fit in. So, maybe I'd dress a certain way, or maybe I'd change my accent a little bit, or maybe I'd try to find an artist that I thought somebody would like, and I would make these false connections. But that was the ultimate disrespect of the people I was visiting. I had to maintain my authenticity to show the actual respect of the other. And that's the basis that we have to enter communities. We have to maintain ourselves so that we actually can, when we ask a question, we can actually be asking it in truth. The second is, as we venture out, we don't have the ability to listen in the regular way. Maybe we speak the language, but we don't know the shorthand. We don't know the cultural markers. We don't know the landscape. And so we have to develop the ability to listen with our hearts. A friend of mine who's a social worker tells a story that among grief counselors, it's well known that grief is often expressed in one's native tongue. No matter how long they've lived in another country, whatever they first grew up with is the tongue and the language that they express true grief with. And the best grief counselors don't ask them to translate. They simply listen emotionally. They listen with their hearts in order to see what that person is feeling and see what they need. We have to cultivate the same sense. We have to listen with our hearts so that we can actually engage people who are very different from us and situations that are very different from us. The third is we have to have authenticity but flexibility of behavior. I lived in India for a while, and one of my projects, I was a consultant, I had a team, and it was all Indians, and the client was all Indians. And we had a kickoff lunch to start the project. It was a nice buffet spread of Indian food. There was the food, there were the plates, there were the napkins, there were the peppers, there were the spices, there was the bread. There was no silverware. So I sort of paused a minute, looked around the room to see how this was happening, and I noticed that people were setting up their plate a certain way. They were using the bread to basically dip the food and eat with their hands. So I did the same thing. I set my plate up the same way. I went and sat down. I started eating with my hands. Didn't say anything, no drama, nothing. 6 months later, one of the team members from the client came up to me. He said, "You know, we were very worried about you when this project started." I said, "Oh, really? Why?" He said, "Because we didn't think you were going to be able to connect with us, being an American and everybody else on the team being Indian." And he said, "Something happened and changed our mind." I said, "What was it?" He said, "The first day you ate with your hands and you didn't say anything about it. You didn't make a big deal out of it." That ability to take a little bit of information and apply it in real time, to have a little bit of flexibility of behavior, can build enormous connection with someone else, especially when you're new to a community. Another is that you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity. Now, rounded to the nearest 1,000, how many times do you think that I've been asked, what is a white guy doing running the Center for Civil and Human Rights? It's in the tens of thousands now. And when I first started with the job, a lot of times I would react a bit defensively. I would say, well, where's this person coming from? But very quickly I noticed that 99% of the time that question was actually asked from the very least curiosity, and most often it was a positive. So I would simply answer it, and then it would open a conversation. Someone would say, here's my connection to the topic, here's my family story, here's what I think you should be doing, and it became a positive exchange. If we're open to the ambiguity that exists when we first enter another community, it will often open up a very intimate conversation quickly. But if we're defensive, if we shut it down, if we try to make it about us, we'll miss that opportunity. The final one that we have to cultivate is one that's very hard to do, and that's overcoming the fear of accidental offense. Now, let me just try to do my best and say, I absolve you of all guilt of accidental offense starting today. Because if you're going to venture out, if you're going to actually practice being a neighbor to different communities, you're going to accidentally offend. My favorite story comes from my own family. My wife's family is originally from India. My family is originally from Oklahoma. And before we were married, my father and I visited my fiancé then's parents' house without my fiancé. We arrived, we had pleasantries, we drank tea, and then my father and I went to take our bags upstairs where we were going to sleep. My father grabbed his bag because he likes to show that he's still pretty spry as an older guy and carried it up the stairs, and I grabbed mine and carried it up the stairs. This caused a very fluxumed phone call from my mother-in-law to my fiancé. And she said, "What is Doug doing disrespecting his father?" And my wife said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "He didn't carry his father's bag up the stairs. Doesn't he know that that's what we do?" Well, this opened up a very interesting and ultimately an amazing conversation about the differences in elders, respect, culture across our burgeoning family. Sometimes we have to venture out. We will accidentally offend, but if we're open to it, we will make the connections and we will overcome that very quickly. You know, when I think about this notion of a neighbor, something happened very early on that makes this whole topic extremely personal to me. I said earlier that I was from a rural town in Arkansas. It was 1,200 people when I grew up there. It's now a thriving metropolis of 2,000 people. I mean, it's just grown exponentially. And when I grew up there, we used to have a joke that there were two minority families in town, the two Catholic families. Because there was no racial, ethnic, religious diversity really of any kind in my little town in Arkansas. And so in one ways, it was an idyllic community. But in another way, it was not the beloved community because it wasn't all inclusive. It didn't allow everybody to be a part of it. So that's where I was from. And being from there, I also was a huge fan of Arkansas college football, as almost anyone is there, the Roaring Razorbacks. And when my brother went to college there, he was older than I was, he befriended one of the football cheerleaders, a guy who lived on his hall, and he called up, he said, if you come to the football game, Arthur will be able to get you on the football field. Well, this was the greatest news that I had heard in my 5 years of life, that I would be able to get onto the football field. So we go to the University of Arkansas, and I meet Arthur, and he takes me on the football field, and he is an incredible guy. He is kind. He is one of those people who connects with kids. He explains to me everything about football. This is a picture of that meeting. I'm on the left. Arthur was my hero. He was the greatest guy I'd ever met. So I convinced my parents and my brother to bring Arthur home to my little town to visit us. Well, the return trip didn't go as well. When Arthur moved around the community, things were said, people were a bit hostile. It was not a great reception. And Arthur's response to it was the same he had had to me. He was kind, he was loving, he was accepting, he was empathetic. He visited our home base in a way that was giving, even though people didn't want him to be there. And that moment set me on a path to do my very best to try to build that empathy within myself for various communities. It inspired me then, it continues to inspire me now. And it's something that I think is epitomized by a quote from someone who, of course, knows a lot about being a neighbor, Fred Rogers. Fred Rogers said, love isn't a state of perfect caring. It's an active noun like struggle. To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is right here and now. That's exactly what Arthur did. When he visited our home, he accepted everyone he encountered, good, bad, or indifferent, exactly who they were right then and right there. This notion of love thy neighbor is something that, for me, transformed me very early in life. It's something that, as I have studied the American Civil Rights Movement and other social movements, it shows itself to have a transformative power on society and is the only way that enemies can be reconciled. And as we look across our community, as we look across our world, the problems strike me as being communal in nature. Whether it be the environment or economic and poverty or freedom and human rights, they're all communal. And I believe today that the only way we can build the capacity individually and collectively to address our communal problems is by pursuing the beloved community, by loving our neighbors. I hope that we'll get started today. Thanks.
Okay. Let me just stop. Just 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So yeah. So let's just talk about what we just saw. Maybe if you've made notes, if you've observed something, you could just share that. Let me know what you think. Did you, maybe first of all, you can say, did you like it, not like it? Was it interesting, not interesting? Yeah, just feel free to, unmute and yeah, your observations in terms of content and also in terms of, what you observe about the speaker, and also some of the things that we've been discussing, right? About the way in which he spoke, what he shared, etc. Okay, anyone?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so I loved the content, and I think it was quite catchy about building that beloved community. He said that word was quite catchy, like how to build a beloved community. And I liked how he said about things, not just defining it like this is what it is, but it's also saying like this is what it's not. It's not just about visiting, but it's about going and building a relationship relationship with him. So sometimes when we explain some things, we go to a verse and we say this is what the verse is. But sometimes when we say this is what it's not, it actually strikes our heart. I think like this is not that thing. So sometimes that was really catchy for me. Like building a community is not just about visiting; it's about going and engaging with them. So if he just said like it's about going and engaging, and he didn't say like it's not about visiting, I don't think I would have got struck in that points. And I also loved how he used examples. I think the presentation was also quite catchy. Sometimes using some pictures, it stays in our mind. I think like I still remember the pictures he showed the Mahatma Gandhi and everyone, the one who was praying over the other. So I think using a picture is also a good point. But I really loved the first point, like what I said, like not saying what it's not. It's something that was really catchy to see.
Thank you, Jeffina. Yeah. So yeah, so you've shared quite a bit. So you see that the whole thing was very precise in what he shared. He shared some things that were very new. He shared in a very interesting way, and also I just like the crispness and the precise manner in which he shared those new thoughts and ideas. And like you said, he presented what is community and what is not community as well, and that you're able to see the both sides of it. And what I noticed was he shared a lot of stories, a lot of examples, right? Stories about the others, stories about himself, which we would say, a personal testimony. So that was very powerful. And also, before I go on, anyone else, if maybe Isaac, Paul, Anita, Lubega, anyone, Lyndon.
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead, Isaac.
like you were talking before the presentation, some of the last part before you shared you're talking about questioning and answering as a means of presentation. I think he used that a lot. He asked a question and he answered it as a way of presenting. I totally like that aspect of it. He asked a question: what is a community? How can we build a community? How can you build your own capacity so that you can able to build a community? I like that question and answer part. Thank you, Pastor.
Right. So, what else? Who else wants to share? We have a couple of more minutes. And we can, next class also, we'll do something similar. But see, what I noticed something upfront was the way he, I'm talking about the presentation, not the content, but the way he made contact with everyone, eye contact. He was looking at the audience. He was very confident, not arrogant, but very confident, very relaxed. Right? He seemed very comfortable doing that. Right? We don't know what was going on in his mind, what is going on inside, but then he was very comfortable and he was relaxed, and that also helped. Right? For us as listeners, that also helped. There were no barriers. We continued, and of course he was very articulate, and he used the right words. And also one of the things that I noticed again was about his presentation. The PowerPoint that he used it at, if you notice, there was not a lot of text. Like there was some things that he mentioned, mindset, skill set. When it comes to applying, how should I actually build, talk about, and some, you need to maintain your authenticity. And when you do that, it's the ultimate respect for the other, and things like that coming through. He used a lot of pictures, used minimal text, because that's what happens when we're making a presentation. Sometimes we the whole lot of information there, but it's information overload. In very simple 4 or 5 points, it has very important big, right? So body language, eye contact. Another thing that was and that really helped or really blew my mind was the fact that he didn't use any notes. Right? Did you notice that? He didn't have any notes in his hand. Probably, I don't know whether he had something on stage, some prompter, teleprompter. We don't know. But the fact is that he didn't know any notes. So, thing is, even if we have notes or an outline, not really, being tied down to it or glancing, looking at it over and over again, that can be pretty distracting. But we saw that it was, very, uh, very nicely done, right? Okay, so we'll continue next class. We'll also have 2 more videos that we just want to watch and also talk about, right? Which will really help us in our own presentation. So no matter what topic, I just want to say that we're dealing with the truth. Okay, um, we have a very important message for the world, and therefore us taking that extra bit to think through, to pray through, and also to see how best can this truth be communicated will go a long way in making our presentation, our message, our sermon really impactful, right? So I just want to encourage us to do that. Okay, so we'll stop here and we'll meet again next class. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Pastor.